The house had 43 rooms. Esther knew this because she had cleaned every one of them. Twice a week, without exception, moving through hallways that smelled of cedar and something colder, the particular silence of a space that had never learned to be warm. She knew which floorboards creaked near the east staircase. She knew the man who owned this place took his coffee without sugar and his calls without witnesses. She knew to finish before he came downstairs. To be gone before he needed the room she had just made perfect. 3 months. That was how long she had lived inside someone else's silence. She was good at this, at making herself small. At moving through other people's lives without leaving marks. The uniform helped. Black dress, white collar, nothing worth looking at twice. Just the maid. Just the girl with the lowered eyes and the careful hands and the references she prayed no one would ever actually call. She did her work and she kept her head down and she told herself that invisible was the same thing as safe, and most days she almost believed it. King barely knew she existed. She had heard him refer to her once as the new one, during a phone call she wasn't supposed to hear. She had kept walking, tray in hand, face empty, and filed that information away with everything else she was learning about how to survive in this house. He was not cruel. He was simply a man for whom other people were background, furniture that moved and occasionally needed direction. She was no different. She preferred it that way. What she could not control was the envelope. It had arrived 6 days ago, forwarded 3 times through addresses she thought she had left behind. She had not opened it the first day, or the second. By the 6th day it sat on the edge of her bed like something alive, and every time she walked past it she felt the pull of it in her chest, that low familiar dread that had been her closest companion for the past 2 years. It was past midnight when she finally picked it up. She thought the house was empty. King had left at 9. She heard the door, heard the car, counted the silence that followed until she was sure. The kitchen light was the only one still on, a small gold square in all that dark, and she brought the envelope downstairs without knowing why, as if the kitchen were neutral ground, as if distance from her room might make the contents hurt less. She opened it. She read it once. Then she sat down on the stool and pressed her hands over her face and let the thing she had been holding at arm's length for months come all the way in. She did not hear him come back. She did not hear him stop in the doorway. She did not know he was there until the air in the room changed, that particular shift when someone is watching you, the thing your body knows before your mind does, and she went rigid, palms still pressed to her face, waiting for the voice that would tell her to compose herself, to remember her place, to be the invisible girl she had worked so hard to become. The voice didn't come. She lowered her hands, turned. King stood in the kitchen doorway in his dark jacket, still dressed from wherever he had been, watching her with an expression she had never seen on him before. Not irritation. Not the smooth, closed blankness he wore through the days like a second skin. Something quieter. His eyes moved from her face to the envelope on the counter. Back to her face. He didn't speak. He crossed the kitchen. Filled 2 glasses of water at the sink. Set one beside her hand without comment. Then he pulled out the stool on the opposite side of the counter and sat down. That was all. Esther stared at him. She had run through 100 versions of being caught, being questioned, being told she was too much trouble, being let go, and not one of them had looked like this. A man who made other men afraid, sitting across a kitchen counter at midnight, doing nothing. Saying nothing. Just staying. She didn't know what to do with that. So she did nothing too. She reached for the glass of water. Drank. Set it down. Slowly the shaking in her hands eased. The silence between them was not comfortable exactly, but it was not hostile either. It was something she didn't have a word for yet. She would think about it later, lying in the dark of her room, turning it over like a coin she wasn't sure was real. He left before she did. No explanation. He simply stood, straightened his jacket, and walked out of the kitchen. A moment later she heard his footsteps on the stairs. Then the house was quiet again. She sat alone in the gold light for a long time after. In the morning neither of them mentioned it. Esther was already working when King came downstairs, moving through the front rooms with her cart, her face arranged into its usual careful calm. She heard him in the kitchen, the coffee machine, the soft sound of a cabinet closing, and she kept moving, steady, deliberate, the way she always moved. Nothing happened. There was nothing to acknowledge. She would not be the one to make it strange. She was wiping down the hallway mirror when she heard him say her name. Not the new one. Not a general address toward the nearest staff member. Her name. Sir. She turned. He was standing in the kitchen doorway with his coffee, watching her the same way he had the night before, with that attention she didn't know what to do with. Have you eaten? She hadn't. She rarely did before noon, a habit formed from years of eating last, eating whatever was left, eating quickly and without fuss so no one would notice she was doing it. She opened her mouth to say she was fine, which was what she always said, and something in his expression made the words stop before they arrived. "No," she said instead. "Sit down." It was not unkind. It was not particularly warm either. It was simply a direction, the same tone he used for everything else, and yet Esther stood in the hallway for 3 full seconds before she moved, her brain trying to find the category this belonged in and coming up empty. She walked into the kitchen. She sat. He put toast in front of her. Then he sat across from her with his coffee and opened something on his phone and did not look at her again. She ate the toast. She would think about those 3 seconds later, the standing, the hesitation, the way her body had resisted before her mind caught up. She would think about the fact that no one in this house had ever asked her that question before. She would think about it more than she meant to, and that would worry her, and she would push it down the way she pushed everything else down. But the toast was good. And the kitchen was warm. And for the first time in 3 months she did not eat quickly. The weeks that followed settled into a new kind of rhythm that Esther did not entirely trust. She noticed the small things first. King stopped taking all his calls behind closed doors. Some of them happened in the hallway now, low and brief, and she would move past without slowing, learning the shape of his work the way she had learned the shape of his house. He noticed things too. She could feel it. Not intrusively, not in a way she could point to, but in the particular awareness of someone who had started paying a different kind of attention. She became more careful about the phone calls. There was a man named Marcus who called every few days, sometimes twice in one evening. She never answered in a room where the door didn't close. She kept her voice flat and short, the way you spoke to someone you needed to hold at distance. The calls always left her sitting on the edge of her bed afterward, staring at the wall with her jaw tight, running numbers in her head she could not make add up no matter how many times she tried. The envelope stayed in her drawer. She could not throw it away. The document inside was a legal notice. Civil, not criminal, but with the weight of something that could become criminal if she did not respond correctly. It had her old address on it. The one she had left in a hurry with one bag and no forwarding information and a story she had never finished telling anyone. She counted the cash in her savings envelope on a Thursday night and the number was not enough. It would not be enough for another 4 months, minimum. She put the money back. She got into bed. She stared at the ceiling and thought about how strange it was to be hiding inside the home of a man who frightened half the city, and to feel, on certain mornings at certain kitchen counters, something that was almost like steady. King noticed the envelope. She knew because she came back to her room one afternoon to find it slightly shifted on her dresser, the way things shifted when a space had been searched by someone practiced enough to nearly cover it. She stood in the doorway for a moment, feeling the strange doubling of it, the violation and the something else underneath, the fact that he had seen it and had not said a word. He was not going to ask her. Not yet. She was not ready to tell him. Not yet. But the distance between those two facts was getting smaller, and she could feel it shrinking the same way you felt a change in weather before it arrived, in the pressure, in the quality of the quiet, in the way a room felt right before it stopped feeling the way it had before. It was a Tuesday evening when the walls between them first developed a crack. King was at the kitchen table with his laptop, which had been happening more frequently, the office left empty while he worked in the shared space, something his staff had noticed and carefully said nothing about. Esther was restocking the pantry, her back to him, working through the task with her usual efficiency. "Where did you work before this?" he asked. Not looking up. "A hotel," she said. "Downtown." "Which one?" She named one. It was true. She had worked there for 8 months before the thing happened that made her leave. "You're overqualified for this job," he said. She turned then because the observation surprised her, not the content, but the fact that he had looked closely enough to arrive at it. He was still watching his screen, but there was something deliberate in his stillness that told her the question had not been casual. "Most people don't notice," she said. "I notice things." She turned back to the pantry. Her hands kept moving. "I needed a live-in position," she said after a moment. This one had the room. It was true. It was also the smallest true thing she could offer, the version of the answer that revealed nothing while technically answering the question. She had gotten good at those. "You never use your day off," he said. "I don't have anywhere particular to be." There was a pause. Then, "That's not the same as not needing rest." She didn't answer that one. She closed the pantry and picked up her cart and left the kitchen, and she did not let herself think too hard about the fact that he had noticed she never left, that he had thought about what it might mean, that he had said it out loud. The conversations kept happening. Short ones at first, the kind that could be mistaken for practical. Then longer. Then one evening she was wiping down the kitchen counter after dinner and she said, without planning to, that she used to want to be a teacher. Past tense. The wanting had been real once and somewhere along the way it had gotten buried under everything else and she hadn't thought about it in years. King looked up from his phone. What happened? He asked. Life, she said. Which was the honest answer even if it wasn't the whole one. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, I was supposed to take over my father's import business. Legitimate. Furniture and textiles. He said it simply, without drama, without the weight she would have expected. Things changed. She looked at him across the kitchen. He was looking back at her, and neither of them said anything else, and the silence was not the same silence that had existed in this house 3 months ago. This one had texture. This one was something they were both choosing. She lay awake that night for a long time. She tried to remember the last time she had told someone something real. Something that belonged to the person she was before she became the woman who carried envelopes she couldn't throw away and answered phone calls in whispers. She could not remember. That was its own kind of answer. The man showed up on a Wednesday afternoon. Esther was in the back garden pulling weeds from around the stone steps when she heard the front bell. She was not the one who answered doors, that was Jean, the house manager, but she heard the exchange through the open side window, heard the voice she recognized before she consciously processed that she recognized it, and her hands went still in the soil. Marcus. Not on the phone this time. Here. She heard Jin's measured response. Mr. King does not receive unannounced visitors. And then she heard another voice, King's, from somewhere inside, asking who was at the door. A brief exchange she couldn't fully make out. Then nothing. She stayed in the garden. She kept her hands busy. She told herself whatever happened next was something she could manage, the way she had managed everything else, the way she always had. She was still telling herself this when King appeared at the garden door. He looked at her for a moment. Just looked. Go inside, he said. Use the back staircase. She went. She did not ask. She sat in her room with the door closed and her hands flat on her knees and she listened to the house around her, the way you listen when you were waiting to find out how bad something was going to be. 20 minutes later there was a knock at her door. King stood in the hallway. His jacket was still on. His expression gave nothing away, but she had been in this house long enough to read the smaller things. The set of his jaw, the way he was standing slightly too still. He's gone, he said. She nodded. Come downstairs. She followed him to the kitchen. He poured 2 glasses of water, the same as the first night, the same automatic gesture, and set one in front of her and stood on the other side of the counter and looked at her with an expression that was not angry. That was the thing she kept bracing for and kept not finding. Tell me everything, he said. So she did. She told him about the hotel. About the manager who had been skimming from staff wages for 2 years and the complaint she had filed and the way the complaint had gotten back to him before it reached anyone who could act on it. She told him about leaving. About the months of moving one city to another, the work wherever she could find it. She told him about Marcus, who was the manager's brother-in-law, a man with a civil attorney and a harassment campaign dressed up in legal language, and the document in her drawer that was a lawsuit she could not afford to fight. She told him all of it. Her voice was steady. Her hands were not. When she finished, the kitchen was very quiet. King had not moved the entire time she was talking. Had not shifted his weight, had not reached for his phone, had not done anything except listen in the particular way of someone who was actually receiving what was being said rather than waiting for their turn to speak. You should have told me sooner, he said. Not angry. Not told you so. Just steady. She looked at him across the counter. I didn't know if you'd keep me on, she said. If you knew I had someone looking for me. That's not how this house works. I didn't know that. He held her gaze. You do now. She didn't know what to do with a man who responded to her truth by leaning in. She had expected distance. She had expected the careful recalibration of someone deciding whether she was more trouble than she was worth. She had not expected this. The steady eyes, the simple sentence, the feeling of something that had been held tightly for a very long time beginning, cautiously, to release. She reached for her water glass. Her hands had stopped shaking. After that, things were different. Not dramatically. Not in ways anyone outside the house would have noticed. But the walls that had existed between them, the careful choreography of employer and invisible employee, had developed gaps that neither of them moved to close. King dealt with Marcus. She didn't ask how. The call stopped. A week later, a brief letter arrived from a different attorney, not Marcus's, informing her that the civil action had been withdrawn. She stood in the kitchen holding the letter, reading it twice, and when King walked past she looked up and said thank you in a voice that came out smaller than she intended. He paused. Looked at her. Don't thank me, he said. Just stop disappearing. She wasn't sure what to do with that either. She was running out of shelves to put things on. His second in command, a quiet man named Sue who moved through the house like a question mark, spoke to King one evening in the study. She was in the hallway, not eavesdropping, passing with clean linens, but the study door was open and she caught her own name and stopped without meaning to. She didn't hear what Sue said. She heard King's response, 2 words, flat and final, and then the sound of the conversation closing. She kept walking. That night, King did not come to the kitchen table. The next day he was formal with her in a way he hadn't been in weeks. Polite, correct, distant in the specific way of someone maintaining distance on purpose. Esther recognized it immediately because she had been doing the same thing to herself for months. She knew what it looked like from the inside. She knew what it cost. She also knew what it felt like to be on the other side of it. To watch someone pull back and read it the only way she knew how, as confirmation that she had been right all along to keep herself small. That the wanting had been the mistake. That she should have known better. She started thinking about leaving. Not dramatically, not with any urgency, just quietly the way she did everything. Researching positions in other cities during the hour before sleep. Doing the math again. Telling herself it was the sensible thing and almost meaning it. She had packed her single bag before. She knew how long it took. 20 minutes if she was being careful. 15 if she wasn't. She didn't make it to 15 minutes. It was a Thursday morning and she was walking back from the market 2 blocks from the house. King's staff usually drove her, but she had wanted the air, had wanted the 20 minutes of being just a person on a street, when a car she didn't recognize slowed beside her. The window came down. A man she had never seen before told her, in a pleasant voice, that she should get in. He said King's name. He said it in a way that made it clear this was not a message from King. She got in because the alternative was worse. She understood, in the quiet way of someone who had spent 2 years being careful about exactly this kind of situation, that she had just become a different kind of problem in a world that solved problems in ways she didn't want to think about. They drove for 40 minutes. No one heard her. No one spoke to her. She sat in the back seat and kept her breathing even and thought about the fact that she had almost left. That she had been packing in her mind for 2 weeks. That she had been so focused on the quiet hurt of King's withdrawal that she had stopped varying her routes, stopped being careful, stopped doing the things that kept a person from becoming useful to someone else's argument. She was put in a room with a window and a lock and a bottle of water and told to wait. She waited. She did not know what happened outside that room. She knew it was not long because the quality of the light through the window had not changed much when she heard the sound in the hallway. Not loud, not chaotic, just the particular efficiency of people who were very good at a thing being very good at it. Then quiet. Then the door opened. King stood in the doorway. No jacket this time. His sleeves were pushed up and there was a tension in his face she had never seen before. Something raw underneath the control, like the surface of still water after something has moved beneath it. He looked at her for a long moment. Then he crossed the room and stood in front of her and breathed. That was it. He didn't reach for her. Didn't speak. Just stood close enough that she could hear him, could feel the fact of him, present and real and there in a way that was its own kind of statement. She understood, standing in that room, that the distance of the past 2 weeks had not been what she thought it was. She understood that she had been reading the wrong text. That a man like King did not know how to say I'm afraid for you, and so he had said nothing, had made himself into a wall, had put distance between them like distance was the same thing as protection. She had done the same thing for 2 years. She almost told him that. Almost said, I know what this is. I've been doing it longer than you have. Instead she said nothing and he said nothing, and they stood in that unlocked room together until the rawness in his face eased by a degree and the room stopped feeling like the inside of a held breath. When they left he walked close. Not touching. Close. All the way back to the car. All the way home. He came to find her the next evening. She was in the garden, the same stone steps, same task she had been doing the day Marcus came to the door. She heard him before she saw him, heard the particular rhythm of his footsteps that she had learned the way she had learned everything else in this house. Without trying, without meaning to, just through proximity and time. He sat on the top step. She stayed where she was, kneeling in the soil and looked up at him. He didn't begin with a speech. He didn't perform composure or give her the version of events that made him look cleaner than he was. He told her the truth in plain language. The rival faction, a family that had been looking for pressure points in his organization for over a year. The attention their closeness had drawn. The specific danger she was in as long as she stayed inside his orbit, and the ways that danger was not going away because he had recovered her from one room in one building on one afternoon. He told her what it would cost. the security she would need, the life it would require. He did not dress it up. "I'm not asking you to stay," he said. "I'm telling you what staying means. So you can decide." She was quiet. The garden was quiet. Somewhere above them a bird moved through the darkening sky and was gone. "You said I should stop disappearing," she said finally. "I remember. I've been disappearing my whole life." She looked at her hands, at the soil under her nails, at the ordinary evidence of a day's work. "I got so good at it I forgot what it felt like to stand still." He looked at her steadily. Waiting. "I don't want to leave," she said. And then, before she could overthink it, before the old habit could pull the words back down, "But I need to know something first." "Ask." She looked at him directly, the way she had learned to in the past months, the way she would not have been able to when she first arrived. "What do you want? Not what you'll do. Not what you can protect me from. What do you actually want?" He went very still. It was not a question people asked him. She could see that in the quality of his stillness, not resistance, but the particular hesitation of someone encountering an unexpected terrain. He was a man who moved through the world in decisions and outcomes, in strategy and cost. No one had ever turned the question back to him at this angle, stripped of all the things it usually came attached to. The garden held its quiet around them. When he spoke, his voice was lower than usual. "I want to stop calculating," he said. "I spend every hour of every day measuring risk and distance and outcome." He paused. "You're the only thing in my life I can't calculate. I don't know what to do with that. I've been treating it like a problem." "It's not a problem," she said. "No," he agreed. "It's not." She stood up, brushed the soil from her knees, stood in front of him at the top of the garden steps in the last of the evening light, and felt, for the first time in longer than she could name, like someone who was exactly where she was supposed to be. Not safe. She was not naive enough to call it safe. His world was what it was, and she was in it now, and there was no version of this that was simple or clean or without cost. She knew that. She had known it for weeks. But she also knew that hiding had not kept her safe. That invisible was not the same as protected. That the things you ran from followed you regardless, and the only real question was whether you faced them alone or beside someone who sat across a kitchen counter at midnight and stayed without being asked. She had been alone for 2 years. She was tired of it. "Okay," she said. King looked at her. Just one word, and he understood all of it, the weight of it, the cost of it, what she was offering and what she was asking for in return. She watched him receive it. Watched something in his face settle, like a room after a long window has finally been opened. He reached out and took her hand. Not dramatically. Not like a scene from something. Just his hand around hers, steady and warm and real, the way he had poured water on the worst night of her year, quietly without announcement, like it was simply the thing that needed to be done. The house had 43 rooms. And for the first time since she had arrived in it, Esther did not feel like she needed to be invisible in any of them. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like and subscribe for more.